Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Laxton. Today we are going to talk about these beautiful things here, wildflowers. It might not be obvious at first, but all of these really different flowers have a few things in common. They all have the same basic parts. You've got the bright, showy parts here. These are the petals of the flower. The petals of the flower are kind of like the flags for the flower, saying, hey, here I am, I'm right here. Then inside you have all of these little things here. These are the stamen, and that's the male part of the flower, and that's how I remember it, because it's stamen. So that has the anthers on the top, and the filament is the part that goes down. And the anther is where the pollen is for the flower. And that's pretty important. Then you've got this part in the middle. See this long one sticking out here? This is the pistil of the flower, which is the female part of the flower. And it has the stigma, which is right here on the top. This is kind of a sticky part. And the style, which is actually a hollow tube here. And it goes down to the ovary where the seeds are. So let's open this one up so we can see all of those parts. So we'll take the petals off. And here we are, we've got the stamen right here and the pistil in the middle. So if we take all the stamens off, look, right down here is this green part, and inside that are seeds waiting to form. So in order for those seeds to form, basically pollen from the stamen over here has to get to the top of the pistil. It falls down through the hollow tube and pollinates in the seeds inside the ovary, and then the seeds start to form and grow. Plants make cool flowers like these ones for a really particular reason. So this oso berry behind me, even though it has a pretty white flower like this, it isn't really trying to beautify the world for us, right? It's trying to make fruit and seeds so it can spread itself around. And this one here already lost the flowers and has some fruit. So that means it worked. The flowers were pollinated and now it's starting to make seeds. So that is the point of the flower. Let's check out a few of our spring flowers here at the Arboretum. The first thing we run into right away is Delphinium, or Larkspur. So you can see how it has this long tube on the back of the flowers, and that's where the nectar is for pollinators in the back. Let's talk a little bit about pollinators. So we looked at the parts of the flower, but in order for the pollen to get onto the pistil so that the flower can make fruit and seeds for the plant, you need a pollinator, at least for most plants. Some plants actually just use the wind to help pollinate them. We'll see some of those later, but a lot of them use pollinators. So that's usually an animal. Flies do a lot more pollination than a lot of people realize. Here's one going inside a flower to look for nectar. Only some pollinators actively collect pollen. Most are searching for nectar and kind of accidentally end up brushing by and moving the pollen. You can see some pollen on this bumblebee's leg. Here's a native bee and a bee fly. Butterflies are pollinators. Hummingbirds too. Notice something that's the same between this flower and the one on my shirt. They are both Oregon Grape. This is an old shirt from a past wildflower festival. Oregon Grape is the Oregon state wildflower. It's a little yellow flower. It is a huge favorite of pollinators, bumblebees, things that kind of come out early when it's still a little cold. A really great way to actually be able to remember flowers is, instead of looking them up or asking what it is immediately, make some observations about it. Basically, you should make friends with the flower, and then you're going to remember it.
Let's do a little practice. What do you notice about these flowers? Maybe their size or shape or color. Maybe the number of petals or stamen you can or can't see. And what do you think about them? Do you like all of them? Do you like some of them more than others? Why? Try to practice noticing these things for yourself. And remember that everyone has certain flowers they're really attracted to and others not so much. It's okay to play favorites. Maybe you want to be friends with some of these flowers more than others. And that's all right. Look, here are some busy carpenter ants. The young queens with the wings are getting ready to fly away to start new colonies. This only happens once a year, so we're lucky to see it.
Something important to know about flowers is that not all flowers look like we think flowers should look. Some flowers are actually really tiny. Some of them are not brightly colored. They're actually pretty green, pretty small, not what you might call beautiful or showy, right? Here's one of those right by me here. This is Sweet Cecily. These little things here are flowers. They're green, they blend in. You've probably walked right past them in the forest before and never noticed them or thought of them as a flower. Why are some flowers not big and pretty and showy like we think flowers maybe should be? Because they're all pollinated by something different. Some flowers are actually pollinated by creatures that prefer something that smells kind of bad to us.
Here's a good example of a flower trying to attract things like flies. The brown color of these checkers lilies mimic rotting fruit. So not all flowers are trying to attract pollinators like bees and butterflies that like sweet, bright things. What a flower looks and smells like depends on the pollinator it wants to attract. Some flowers are really picky. They only want to be pollinated by certain pollinators, like the shooting star flower. Their stamens are stuck together, so they can only be pollinated by something that will vibrate them strongly enough to open them, like bees.
Some flowers aren't native. They're non-native. They're not from here. They came from somewhere else, like these dandelions or this daffodil. They're not from here, but they were brought here and they've been able to do well. So they're naturalized. That means you can find them now growing out in the wild, mixed in with our native wildflowers. This is an example of another non-native flower that you can find growing wild at Mount Pisgah. It's shining geranium. So it's all of these leaves here, and there's the really pretty little pink flower that they have. The problem with this non-native flower is that it's invasive. So an invasive plant is one that's not from here, and it takes over and makes it really hard for a lot of our native plants to grow. Shining geranium is a really tiny little plant. I mean, here's my hand. It's not big. The problem is that it shades out a lot of our other small native wildflowers and makes it really hard for them to have space to grow. So non-native plants, and especially invasive non-native plants, are really a big problem in a lot of our natural areas around the whole country. And it's making it really hard for a lot of native plants to be able to survive and grow. These are one of my favorite spring flowers out here, the Western Buttercup. There's just something about the shine on those petals that's so attractive. This is the coast fork of the Willamette River, which runs right next to the base of Mount Pisgah Arboretum. And you might notice the branches of a couple large trees hanging over the river in this spot. And on those branches are flowers. Some people don't realize that trees also have flowers. We'll go check these ones out a little bit closer. Flowers are ones that we often don't notice. They don't last that long, and then they kind of get covered up by the ginormous leaves of the aptly named big leaf maple. Here's some pollination gone wrong, for the pollinator at least. A honeybee has gotten trapped by a crab spider up at the top of this flower. That not all flowers are pollinated by animals. Some are pollinated by the wind. So this is a grass flower. Pollen just kind of blows around and the grass just sort of hopes that the pollen hits another flower of another grass plant nearby. And there's a lot of grass around here, so I think that strategy is working out pretty well for them. This little pink and white striped flower is called candy flower. You can see around it quite a bit of the shining geranium. Remember that invasive flower that we talked about earlier? So candy flower is a flower that gets outcompeted by the shining geranium. What do you think this could be under the leaves? It's probably a mole searching for insects. Okay, look at this tiny little flower here. What do you notice about it? Does it remind you of any of the other flowers that we've seen so far? If you said the buttercup, you're right. This is the disappointing or unseen buttercup. So it's another little buttercup, but it's tiny, and half the time it loses a whole bunch of its petals, so it only has like 1 or 2 on there, but they're shiny just like a regular buttercup. Here's another fun named flower. This one is bleeding heart. So they kind of are shaped like a heart, and they are a pinky color. I mean, this is a flower that's so pretty that people often plant it in their yards. You can buy them in nurseries. This is our native one here. It's kind of a light pink color, sort of purpley when it's young. Here's the pond. The pond lilies will be in flower soon. Right there on the log, you can see one of our western pond turtles hanging out in the sun. Camas is one of everyone's favorite wildflowers out at Mount Pisgah in the spring. That's probably because it's really connected with the Oregon white oak savanna habitat. And the Mount Pisgah area has one of the largest remaining oak savanna habitats in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. These lovely little early spring flowers are called baby blue eyes, but we have the white variety here. So they're often called salt and pepper flower in this area because of the tiny little black dots that you can see on the inside. Those are kind of like landing strips for pollinators. They're little arrows saying, go this direction to find the nectar and the pollen pollinator. You'll notice there's quite a few little flowers around that if you look inside of them, you can find dots or striping. And all of those things are signals to pollinators. Here's a pileated woodpecker climbing up the tree. It's our biggest woodpecker in the area. These are the kind of holes that it makes. Cat's ear lily. This is the first one I found this year. It is so well named. Look at this fuzzy petals. They just look like the inside of a cat ear. Oh, look. I knocked a little bug out of the middle of it. Oregon iris. Such interesting constructed flowers. I mean, look at these petals, right? And remember we were just talking about like striping and stuff, signaling pollinators? Look at the striping on this one. And then look, it opens up inside. So the pollinators need to follow those stripes to get down into the flower where there's actually nectar. Here are fawn lilies next to me and out behind me. So fawn lilies are a flower that really like the forests. They like shadier areas, and they're also one of the earliest flowers that we have out here. One of the earliest like big showy flowers for sure.
Fairy slipper orchids are a really small little flower on the forest floor, so that sometimes you don't notice them at first, but then once you see one, you see them everywhere. They have ultraviolet color going on. To us, it just looks like this sort of pinky purple color, but for a lot of insects, these flowers are lit up like a neon sign in the forest.
Some flowers, like the fairy slipper orchids behind me, are really delicate. If they get picked, that can really harm the plant. The other thing is that a lot of our native wildflowers have lost a lot of habitat. There aren't very many of them left. There aren't a lot of places for them to grow. They're having to deal with all those invasive plants like the shining geranium. So us picking them just compounds those issues. So a lot of wild spaces, like Mount Pisgah Arboretum, ask that you do not pick the wildflowers so that we can have a place that they can grow. Also, when you pick a flower, that is a flower that can no longer make seeds and no longer make new flowers next spring. So the more flowers you pick, the more chances you're taking away from the flowers to be able to reproduce and grow new plants. Look, here's a fawn lily that is almost done with its flower phase, and it worked. It got pollinated. You can tell because the ovary part here, which is the green part, is starting to swell and get bigger and going upright. And that means that it worked. Some of the pollen from a different flower probably came onto the top of the pistil, got stuck on the sticky stigma, fell down the hollow tube of the style, and went into the ovary. And now this flower is working on making seeds. Thanks so much for coming out with me on a walk today and letting me show you some of the awesome wildflowers that we have out here at Mount Pisgah Arboretum in the spring. Bye, thanks.